It was 4:35 in the morning on March 30th, 2025, when the emergency dispatcher in Alexandria, Louisiana, received a call that would shatter the quiet of a Saturday dawn. Domestic disturbance with shots fired, came the urgent report from the 5900 block of Ron Marr Drive in the Bocaja subdivision. When officers arrived at the scene, they discovered a tragedy that would leave an entire community asking one devastating question. How does someone who dedicated their entire life to helping others become a victim of the very violence they work to prevent? Inside that home lay 38-year-old Shaterica Smith, a woman whose story of determination and resilience could inspire anyone facing impossible odds. This was someone who had been rejected not once but twice from nursing school, yet refused to let those setbacks define her future. Someone who learned Spanish specifically to help patients who couldn't speak English. Someone who traveled to Africa on a mission trip because she believed in making the world a better place. But on that March morning, all of Shaterica's dreams, all of her plans to revolutionize nursing education in Arkansas, all of her unwavering optimism came to a violent end at the hands of 42-year-old Tracy Johnson, who then turned the weapon on himself. If stories of resilience and the fight against domestic violence matter to you, hit that like button, because Shaterica's story deserves to be heard, and her legacy deserves to live on through the awareness we create together. Have you ever met someone who refused to give up on their dreams, no matter how many times they were told no? Someone whose positive energy seemed unbreakable, even when life threw everything it could at them? That was Shaterica Smith. And today, we're going to honor her memory by telling the complete story of a life that was far too extraordinary to end this way. To understand the magnitude of what was lost on that March morning, we need to go back to where it all began. Little Rock, Arkansas, in the late 1980s, where a little girl was born who would grow up to embody everything we hope to see in humanity. Shaterica Smith wasn't just another student walking the halls of Little Rock Central High School. While her classmates were focused on typical teenage concerns, Shaterica was already showing signs of the compassionate leader she would become. She threw herself into the Spanish club, spending hours perfecting a language that would later become her bridge to helping countless patients who felt invisible in a healthcare system that didn't speak their language. She joined the knitting club, finding peace and creating something beautiful with her hands. And through Junior Civitan, she discovered her calling for community service, a passion that would define every major decision she made for the rest of her life. When graduation came in 2010, Shaterica had her sights set on nursing. She enrolled at the University of Central Arkansas with dreams of healing others, of being the caring face that patients would see during their most vulnerable moments. But life had other plans. The nursing program rejected her application. Most people would have taken this as a sign to choose a different path. Not Shaterica. She applied again and was rejected again. Here's where Shaterica's true character revealed itself. Instead of giving up, she adapted. She spent a year at Baptist Health Schools of Little Rock, gaining hands-on experience in the medical field. She shifted her focus to health education, public health education, and promotion, earning her bachelor's degree in December 2016. But even that wasn't enough for someone with Shaterica's ambition. She pursued a Master of Business Administration with a concentration in healthcare from the Jack Welch Management Institute, graduating in 2020. Every step of this journey was building towards something bigger, a vision that would have changed lives across Arkansas. Shaterica's dream wasn't just about her own success. She wanted to create a night nursing program in Arkansas specifically designed for people who couldn't afford to stop working during the day to pursue their education. She understood that not everyone had the luxury of traditional schooling, and she was determined to remove that barrier. Her plan was to help others achieve their nursing dreams while simultaneously putting herself through nursing school, turning her own setbacks into a pathway for others to succeed. But Shaterica's impact wasn't limited to her future plans. As a patient access representative at Conifer Health Solutions, she made sure every patient's information was accurate and handled their insurance matters with care. Previously, as an administrative specialist at the Arkansas Department of Health, she processed vital records and worked directly with patients in clinics that served the most vulnerable populations in her community. And here's where those 7 years of Spanish study in high school paid off in ways she probably never expected. Shaterika could communicate fluently with non-English-speaking patients, offering them dignity and understanding in moments when they felt most alone and confused. She didn't just see patients as cases or numbers, she saw them as human beings, deserving of compassion and respect. Her 5-week mission trip to Africa only reinforced what everyone who knew her already understood. Shaterika had a heart that couldn't ignore suffering, no matter where she found it. She came back from that experience with a philosophy that would guide her through every challenge: find something beautiful in every day. When Shaterika described herself, she used words like achiever, courageous, loyal, beautiful, and honest. But those who knew her would add so much more: determined, selfless, visionary, and unbreakable, or so it seemed. While most people talk about making a difference, Shaterika Smith was actually doing it, one patient at a time, one interaction at a time, one dream at a time. At Conifer Health Solutions, Shaterika's role as a patient access representative might have seemed routine to outsiders, but she transformed it into something meaningful. Every insurance form she processed, every patient record she updated, every phone call she answered was an opportunity to ease someone's burden during what was likely one of the most stressful times in their life. Healthcare can be overwhelming and confusing, especially when you're already dealing with illness or injury. Shaterika made sure that at least one part of that process, the administrative side, would be handled with precision and care. But it was her previous role at the Arkansas Department of Health where Shaterika's true calling became crystal clear. Processing vital records might sound like paperwork to most people, but for Shaterika, these weren't just documents. They were pieces of people's lives. Birth certificates that would help children get into school, death certificates that would help families find closure, marriage licenses that would make love official. She understood that behind every form was a human story that mattered. Working in clinics that served vulnerable populations, Shaterika encountered people who had been overlooked, dismissed, or simply forgotten by society. These were patients who often felt invisible, who struggled to navigate a healthcare system that seemed designed to exclude them. And this is where those 7 years of Spanish study became more than just a high school requirement. They became a lifeline. When a scared mother brought her sick child to the clinic and couldn't explain the symptoms in English, Shaterika was there. When an elderly man needed help understanding his medication instructions but felt embarrassed about the language barrier, Shaterika was there. When someone felt lost and alone in a system that seemed to speak a different language entirely, Shaterika was there, offering not just translation, but genuine human connection. This wasn't just about being bilingual. It was about recognizing that healthcare is a human right, regardless of what language you speak or where you come from. Shaterika saw the fear in people's eyes when they couldn't communicate their pain, and she made it her mission to bridge that gap. Her vision for the night nursing program wasn't born in a boardroom or a classroom. It was born from these real-world experiences. She had seen too many capable, caring people who wanted to help others, but couldn't afford to quit their jobs to pursue traditional nursing education. She had met single parents working multiple jobs who dreamed of becoming nurses, but couldn't attend day classes. She had encountered people whose life circumstances made conventional education impossible, but whose hearts were perfectly suited for healing. Shaterika's plan was revolutionary in its simplicity: create a pathway for working adults to pursue nursing education without sacrificing their ability to support themselves and their families. She would establish this program, help others achieve their dreams, and then use the experience and connections to finally pursue her own nursing degree, the goal that had been deferred but never abandoned. Shaterika believed in lifting others up. If her story inspires you to never give up on your dreams, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is show someone else that their dreams are worth fighting for. What's a dream you've been told to give up on? Let us know in the comments, because if Shaterika's story teaches us anything, it's that rejection doesn't mean the end. It just means you haven't found the right path yet. This was someone who had turned every setback into a setup for something greater. every closed door into motivation to build her own entrance, every no into fuel for an even bigger yes. Sheterica Smith wasn't just planning a career, she was designing a legacy that would outlive her, a system that would help countless others long after she was gone. But on March 30th, 2025, all of those plans, all of that potential, all of that hope would be stolen in an instant. March 30th, 2025 started like any other Saturday in Alexandria, Louisiana. Most people were still asleep at 4:35 in the morning, enjoying the weekend rest they'd earned after a long week. But in the Bocage subdivision on the 5900 block of Murd Drive, something was terribly wrong. The call came into the Alexandria Police Department as a domestic disturbance involving shots fired. Those words send a chill through any emergency dispatcher. Domestic disturbances are among the most dangerous calls officers respond to, and when firearms are involved, the stakes become life and death. When officers arrived at the residence, they were met with a scene that would haunt them forever. Inside the home, they discovered 38-year-old Sheterica Smith, dead from a gunshot wound. The woman who had dedicated her life to healing others, who had spent years learning Spanish just to help patients feel less alone, who had traveled to Africa to serve those in need, she was gone. Also found in the home was 42-year-old Tracy Johnson, who appeared to have died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. In an instant, what had begun as a domestic disturbance had escalated into a murder-suicide that would leave a community reeling and a family destroyed. Tracy Johnson, the man who took Sheterica's life before taking his own, remains largely a mystery. At 42 years old, he was 4 years older than Sheterica, but beyond that basic fact, very little is known about who he was or what led him to commit such a devastating act. There are no public records indicating a significant criminal history, no obvious red flags that might have predicted this outcome. But that's often the terrifying reality of domestic violence. It can hide behind closed doors, wearing the mask of normalcy until it explodes into tragedy. What we do know is that the nature of this crime, a murder-suicide in a domestic setting, strongly suggests that Tracy and Sheterica had some form of intimate relationship. Whether they were dating, living together, or had some other personal connection, the circumstances point to the kind of possessive, controlling behavior that characterizes the most dangerous forms of domestic abuse. The timing of the incident, 4:35 in the morning, suggests this wasn't a random act of violence or a crime of opportunity. This was something that happened in the privacy of a home, in the early hours when most of the world was asleep, when no one could hear what was happening or intervene to save Sheterica's life. The location itself tells a story too. Murd Drive in the Bocage subdivision is a quiet residential area off Twin Bridges Road, the kind of neighborhood where people feel safe, where domestic violence seems like something that happens to other people in other places. But domestic violence doesn't discriminate by zip code or income level. It can happen anywhere to anyone, even to someone as strong and accomplished as Sheterica Smith. The police immediately recognized this as a domestic violence case and launched an investigation. But by Monday morning, when reporters asked for updates, there was nothing new to report. The investigation was continuing, but the basic facts were already clear. A woman who had spent her life helping others had become another statistic in America's domestic violence epidemic. The devastating irony is almost too painful to comprehend. Here was someone who had made it her mission to care for the most vulnerable members of society, who had learned a second language specifically to help people who felt voiceless, who had traveled across the world to serve those in need, and in the end, she became the one who needed help. Help that never came. Help that arrived too late. Help that couldn't save her from the violence that was happening behind closed doors. Sheterica Smith, who had found something beautiful in every day, who had turned every rejection into motivation, who had planned to revolutionize nursing education in Arkansas. Her story ended, not with the triumph she deserved, but with a senseless violence that cut short too many lives, too many dreams, too many futures that will never be. Sheterica Smith's death wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a devastating pattern that claims lives across America every single day. While her story is unique in its details, the broader circumstances, are tragically familiar to anyone who works in domestic violence prevention. Every day in the United States, approximately 3 women are murdered by their intimate partners. That's more than 1,000 women each year whose lives are cut short not by strangers or random violence, but by someone they trusted, someone they may have loved, someone who was supposed to protect them. Shaterika became part of this heartbreaking statistic on that March morning in Alexandria. Murder-suicides in domestic violence cases follow a particularly disturbing pattern. The perpetrator, often facing the loss of control over their victim, whether through a breakup, divorce, or the victim's attempt to leave, chooses to destroy both lives rather than accept the end of the relationship. It's the ultimate act of possession. If I can't have you, no one can. Tracy Johnson's decision to take his own life after killing Shaterika fits this pattern perfectly. What makes these cases especially tragic is how they often come without warning to the outside world. Unlike other forms of violence that might have visible precursors, domestic abuse frequently happens behind closed doors. Neighbors, co-workers, and even family members may have no idea that someone they know is living in fear. The victim may be skilled at hiding bruises, making excuses for their partner's behavior, or simply too afraid to reach out for help. In Shaterika's case, there's no public record of previous domestic violence incidents involving Tracy Johnson. This doesn't mean there weren't warning signs. It means they either weren't reported, weren't recognized, or weren't documented. Many domestic violence situations escalate gradually, with emotional and psychological abuse preceding physical violence. Controlling behavior, isolation from friends and family, threats, and intimidation can all be precursors to lethal violence. The early morning timing of this incident is also significant. Many domestic violence murders happen during overnight hours when victims are most vulnerable and isolated. There are no witnesses, no one to call for help, no chance for intervention. The home, which should be a place of safety and refuge, becomes a trap. Louisiana, where this tragedy occurred, has consistently ranked among the states with the highest rates of domestic violence deaths. The state has struggled with this crisis for years, despite efforts to strengthen laws and improve resources for victims. The reality is that domestic violence is a complex social problem that requires more than just law enforcement response. It requires community awareness, education, prevention programs, and a fundamental shift in how we think about relationships and power. What's particularly heartbreaking about Shaterika's case is the contrast between her professional life and her personal fate. She spent her career helping vulnerable populations, working with people who needed advocates and support. She understood what it meant to be marginalized, to need someone who would listen and care. Yet when she needed that same kind of help, it either wasn't available or wasn't accessible to her. This highlights one of the most insidious aspects of domestic violence. It can affect anyone, regardless of education, profession, or social status. Shaterika had an MBA, a successful career, and a bright future ahead of her. She was articulate, accomplished, and connected to her community, but none of those factors protected her from becoming a victim. The ripple effects of domestic violence extend far beyond the immediate victims. Shaterika's death didn't just end her life, it ended her dreams of creating that night nursing program. It robbed Arkansas of a healthcare advocate. It left patients without someone who truly understood their struggles, and it sent shockwaves through a community that had lost someone who made their world better. Understanding these broader patterns doesn't diminish the uniqueness of Shaterika's story, but it does help us see how her death fits into a larger crisis that demands our attention, our resources, and our commitment to change. Shaterika Smith's life teaches us that resilience isn't just about bouncing back from failure. It's about transforming rejection into purpose, setbacks into stepping stones, and personal struggles into pathways for helping others. When the nursing program rejected her twice, she didn't just find another career. She found a way to revolutionize how nursing education could work for people like her who faced barriers to traditional programs. Her story challenges us to examine how we respond to the word no. Most of us hear rejection and retreat. Shaterika heard rejection and redesigned her approach. She understood that closed doors don't mean the end of the journey, they mean you need to build your own entrance. Her plan to create a night nursing program wasn't just about achieving her own dreams. It was about ensuring that others wouldn't face the same obstacles she had encountered. The way Shaterika approached her work reveals another crucial lesson about finding meaning in everyday tasks. She could have seen processing vital records as mundane paperwork, but she recognized that behind every document was a human story that mattered. She could have viewed her role as a patient access representative as routine administrative work, but she understood that for patients navigating a confusing healthcare system, she might be the one person who made them feel heard and valued. Her commitment to learning Spanish wasn't just about adding a skill to her resume, it was about recognizing that healthcare should be accessible to everyone, regardless of language barriers. In a world that often treats non-English speakers as inconveniences, Shaterika saw them as human beings deserving of dignity and care. She spent 7 years studying Spanish not because she had to, but because she wanted to be the bridge between vulnerable patients and the help they needed. The mission trip to Africa that shaped her philosophy of finding beauty in every day wasn't just a travel experience, it was a masterclass in perspective. Shaterika learned that even in the midst of poverty, suffering, and hardship, there are moments of grace, connection, and hope. This mindset allowed her to maintain optimism even when facing her own challenges, and it's a lesson that could transform how any of us approach difficult times. But perhaps the most important lesson from Shaterika's life is about the power of service. She didn't just want to be successful, she wanted her success to lift others up. Every goal she set, every plan she made, every dream she pursued was connected to helping other people achieve their own potential. Her vision for the night nursing program wasn't about personal glory. It was about removing barriers that prevented capable, caring people from entering the healthcare field. However, Shaterika's death forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about domestic violence and our collective responsibility to address it. Her story reminds us that domestic violence doesn't discriminate based on education, career success, or personal strength. It can affect anyone, including people who dedicate their lives to helping others. This tragedy also highlights the importance of community awareness and intervention. Domestic violence thrives in silence and isolation. When we create communities where people feel safe to speak up about abuse, where warning signs are recognized and addressed, where victims know they have support and resources available, we can prevent tragedies like this one. Shaterika's legacy shouldn't just be about mourning what was lost, it should be about continuing the work she started. Every person who pursues their dreams despite rejection, every healthcare worker who goes the extra mile for vulnerable patients, every individual who learns a new skill to better serve their community, every advocate who fights to make education more accessible, they're all carrying forward Shaterika's mission. Her philosophy of finding something beautiful in every day becomes even more powerful when we consider how her life ended. Even in the face of this tragedy, we can find beauty in the lives she touched, the patients she helped, the dreams she inspired, and the example she set for turning obstacles into opportunities. Shaterika Smith proved that one person with determination, compassion, and vision can make a difference. Now it's up to us to ensure that her impact doesn't end with her death, but continues through the lives she inspired and the changes we make in her memory. Shaterika Smith's story doesn't end with that tragic morning in Alexandria, Louisiana. It continues through every person who refuses to give up on their dreams, every healthcare worker who goes the extra mile for vulnerable patients, and every individual who chooses to turn their setbacks into setups for helping others. But her story also continues through us, through our commitment to ensuring that domestic violence doesn't claim another brilliant life, another dreamer, another person who could have changed the world. Shaterika's story doesn't end here, it continues through us. Subscribe to join our mission of bringing awareness to these important stories and getting justice for victims like Shaterika. When we share these stories, when we refuse to let victims be forgotten, when we demand better protection for those facing domestic violence, we're honoring their memory and potentially saving future lives. What state or country are you watching from? Let's show how far Shaterika's story has reached. Drop your location in the comments. Let's create a global community of people who believe that stories like Shaterika's matter, that domestic violence awareness matters, that every dream cut short by violence deserves to be remembered and honored. How can we better support domestic violence prevention in our communities? Maybe it's volunteering at local shelters. Maybe it's learning to recognize warning signs. Maybe it's simply being the kind of person others feel safe talking to when they're in trouble. Share your ideas in the comments, because collective action starts with individual commitment. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please know that help is available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Chiterica wanted to create a night nursing program that would help working adults achieve their healthcare dreams without sacrificing their ability to support their families. While she's no longer here to build that program herself, her vision lives on. Maybe someone watching this video will be inspired to create accessible education programs. Maybe someone will be motivated to learn a second language to better serve their community. Maybe someone will choose to see rejection not as an ending, but as redirection towards something even better. When Chiterica described herself as an achiever, courageous, loyal, beautiful, and honest, she was describing qualities that live on in everyone who chooses to follow her example. When she said her goal was to find something beautiful in every day, she was offering us a roadmap for resilience that can carry us through our darkest moments. The woman who was rejected twice from nursing school but never gave up on her dream to heal others, who learned Spanish specifically to help patients who felt voiceless, who traveled to Africa because she believed in making the world better, that woman's legacy is now in our hand. Chiterica Smith believed that every person deserved dignity, care, and the opportunity to achieve their dreams. She believed that barriers were meant to be broken down, that rejection was just redirection, and that service to others was the highest calling. Today we honor her memory not just by remembering her story, but by living her values. We honor her by refusing to let domestic violence claim another brilliant life in silence. We honor her by supporting each other's dreams, by learning new skills to serve our communities better, and by never giving up on the belief that one person can make a difference. Chiterica's dreams may have been cut short, but her impact is eternal, and that impact grows every time someone shares her story, every time someone refuses to give up on their goals, and every time we choose to be the kind of community where people like Chiterica can thrive safely. Rest in peace, Chiterica Smith. Your story will not be forgotten.